Alors, bienvenue tout le monde. Welcome everyone to that session 5, a special session with a mixed panel of students and professor. Just to give you a few points for logistics. So the topic we'll be covering is about shifts in attitude, shift in perception, in practices and in role. Nos panélistes vont être les premiers à aborder la thématique avec quelques idées qu'ils ont identifiées. Alors, we'll give them a few minutes each in 2 groups, like first 2 panelists, and then we'll take some of your question comments and move on to the last 2 panelists, and then open up the floor at the end for the rest of the time for question. So if we are ready to go, I'll introduce them one at a time. Then maybe, Jovan, do you want people to open up their camera and their microphone just to say hi, quick hi, and then we'll be ready to start the first pair that will start the discussion.
Sounds good.
Panelists, do you want to open up your camera and your microphone? So just so that I can give you a quick tour of our group. So the first one that's going to be, I'm going to let Jovan highlight everyone. Are you going to put everyone in the middle, Jovan? Here you go. So depending on who you're looking at, Hélène Beaulieu is one of our professors at the university in biology. So she's going to be our closing person at the end of the session. Samantha To at the bottom of my screen. Hopefully you got the same setup as I have. She's a student in second language. Jacinthe Savard from the Faculty of Health Sciences, so a professor in occupational therapy. And Tim Gulliver, a student in political science. That's gonna also be part of our group of our panelists for today. So on that note, I think I'm gonna let Samantha start. She had something visual she wants to share. And I think she even have prepared something with a video. So Samantha, you're on.
Thank you very much. I'm just gonna go ahead and share my screen. And if you guys can let me know if you're seeing it all right.
Yes.
Perfect. So I'm going to also send something in the chat, a link for the presentation. So the question and the prompt was observing the shifts in attitudes and perceptions of online learning. I chose to take a more global approach and talk about learning in general and how it's changed since we started online learning. So if you guys can now click the link in the chat, it will open up a web page to a website that will prompt you to write in a word that you think of, that comes to mind when you think of learning. So as you guys respond in the conversation, it will show up in real time here on my screen. Now, this is just one of the many ways I like to check in with students and with my peers. And I find that giving opportunities like this to express and reflect on how students are feeling and how they're dealing with their online learning journey is really important. And it'll help us to move forward and work towards a change in perspective. So this is great. Thank you so much for participating. I will be returning back to the presentation aspect. So it's crucial that we understand these shifts in perspectives and attitudes towards online learning. And I think it's misunderstood that the source of the problem is the changes that we've seen as time progresses. But the fact is that online is the only change that I've noticed. There has been no changes to online learning, and we have yet to adapt to the online aspect of education, teaching and learning. So I can sit here and talk about my experiences, but I feel it's crucial that we give a voice to real students and real educators who are dealing with these very real situations on a daily basis. I'm gonna play this audio clip I have several. It's basically showcasing the struggles that students are dealing with. Can someone confirm that you guys can hear the audio?
School feels a lot.
I can hear it.
Since it's online.
Perfect. So I'm just going to continue showing the rest of the audio clips that I've collected.
The volume is very low, though.
I used to be really motivated and dedicated to school, and I've definitely seemed to care less about my education and just my grades in general, because there's no real optimism anymore.
Is the audio clear for everyone?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Thank you.
School has become just another thing I have to get through instead of learning something I love with passion.
The volume was a little low on that one, Samantha.
One of the most important things that changed was my view on different student situations. When I saw students come into school, I would see their faces, I would see them smile. You know, they would almost put on this kind of mask because they were, there's a lot of times that students hide from what they're going through at home.
So I then asked the same people what their motivation was to continue on and keep learning online despite the struggles, and this is what they had to say.
My current motivation to get through school right now is honestly just the degree at the end of it, because I'm going through the motions because I know I have to.
So our students rely on the social skills that they learn at school. They rely on getting out of the house and having that, connection with other students and connection face to face with their educators. And it's just something that they're not getting online.
Another aspect that has changed is the evaluation process. I've noticed a lot of students and teachers are talking about this because there has been drastic changes in this factor due to the online due to online learning. So here's what a couple of people had to say about that.
Well, because everything's online, cheating is pretty inevitable.
I find that I've been struggling more as there are less evaluations to base our marks on. The marks I've received during online learning don't properly reflect my knowledge on the subjects, as there aren't as many opportunities to showcase what I've learned.
I don't think judging someone from one form of evaluation kind of can reflect how much they know, because people get anxious, things get lost in translation.
So clearly this shift in attitudes and views is a source of problems for students and teachers. And now as a student studying to become an educator, I've had my share of teaching experiences, and I can say that the source of the problem lies not in the people, but the environment that is fostered by the people in the classroom. Now there are solutions that we can move towards to accommodate for the online learning experience, but just talking about them is not going to answer our problem. So what can we do? The first step is to understand what the issue is. And I think we've done a pretty good job at understanding the issues and evaluating what the source of the issue is. The next one is a hard one, but we need to accept responsibility. And the responsibility is, the thing is, no one is to blame for the situation, and students, teachers, administrators, we all have to understand the importance of moving towards that change. And the issue is rooted in the way we teach. So we need to move away from the traditional methods that we use in the in-person environment.
I hope.
I also spoke to a couple of students and teachers, and this is what they said about what they hope to see upon their return to the in-class environment.
That educators will accommodate students when they return to the in-class environment. If we continue to learn and teach the way we do now, we will all be failing school.
Because of this, school and boards will need to better adapt their policies for online learning, and educators need to be more flexible with online.
So how can we make this change? How can we move away from these traditional methods? We need to listen to the needs of students and educators. Both parties are important, and just as responsible for motivating that change, we need to be open to new ideas and be willing to foster an interactive learning environment. I'll speak a little bit more on the interaction component as we proceed. So I mentioned this previously, education is not merely learning. We need to change the way we teach, the way we learn, and the way we evaluate. Since teaching and learning happen interdependently, students and teachers should be encouraged to interact. By fostering interaction, we can only hope to see participation and engagement, but then it's up to educators to troubleshoot, visit the source of error, and by cooperating, by communicating, and continuing to have that desire to teach and to learn with their students, we'll be able to allow for evaluations that are more reflective of student performance and their capabilities. So through the evaluation of soft skills, the application of the knowledge, and this should be done through clear communication, and that communication should be going both ways to students and teachers. The evaluation should not be simply knowledge-based, and that's something that a lot of students have noticed changed since online learning has been implemented. So I've seen these ideas work before, and I'd like to share a couple of my personal experiences where I've been in the role of a student as well as a teacher, and I was engaged in an interaction of the content in the lessons. And I have to say, this method only works if you do. I like to call this active learning by cooperative teaching. And this is something that I thought about to combat this lack of motivation, the change in attitudes and minimal interaction from students and teachers. And this method is done through interaction with activities, tasks, and discussions. I use this method in the cadet program where I'm an instructor to youth and teenagers. I use stories, I use situational based questions and prompts to encourage the young cadets to share their personal experiences with each other. And what this does is it fosters a safe discussion space on the lesson content. And this way of teaching is a lot more meaningful and more productive than the traditional lecture method, which we should be moving away from. I think that it's easy to talk about yourself and your experiences, your knowledge, but by giving the opportunity to students to engage in that conversation, we're empowering students to become more confident about their work and their end result of their learning. And I think these ideas, they really do look good on paper. It would be ideal, but it's obviously easier said than done. I think that we're taking the right steps in the right direction, and we need to keep opening up conversations and opportunities for these kind of improvements and changes. I'd like to thank you for your time and your attention. I've attached my email below if you'd like to reach out to me or have any further questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Samantha. Great opening. Let's add a professor to the mix. So, la question qu'on avait adressée aux professeurs, c'était de nous parler de leurs expériences ou de leurs changements au niveau de leur perception, de leur pratique ou de leur rôle en tant que professeur. Alors, je vais passer la parole à Jacinthe pour son petit 8 minutes d'introduction, puis ensuite de ça, on pourra ouvrir pour le début de la discussion.
OK. Donc, bonjour tout le monde. Moi, je vais présenter en français, mais je peux répondre à des questions en anglais au besoin. Est-ce que vous voyez bien mon écran?
Oui.
OK. Donc, j'ai pas un PowerPoint aussi beau que celui de Samantha. J'ai juste décrit mes cours. Je suis assez privilégiée d'enseigner déjà dans des cours où l'enseignement se fait en petits groupes. Le cours ERG 6742, celui qui est à droite de la diapositive, c'est celui qui a le moins changé depuis qu'on est passé en ligne. C'est un cours qui était déjà donné en séminaire avec des petits groupes de 10 étudiants dans lequel les étudiants, à chaque semaine, c'est un cours qui est donné 2 fois par semaine, 2 fois 3 heures par semaine, et puis pendant 6 semaines au lieu de sur 12 semaines. Et puis les étudiants, la première journée, ils ont un problème, une histoire de cas, un client qui a un problème de santé physique, une fracture de l'arthrite, une amputation, une lésion de la moelle épinière, les cas qu'on voit en ergothérapie traditionnellement. Et puis, ils doivent analyser le cas avec les différents cadres d'analyse qu'ils ont vus dans d'autres cours, la théorie, les principes de traitement en ergothérapie qu'ils ont vus dans leurs autres cours. Et puis, s'il leur manque des informations, entre les 2 cours, ils doivent faire de la recherche personnelle. Au début du 2e cours, ils doivent apporter les réponses à ce qui leur manquait et puis après ça, ils font le plan d'intervention. Donc, celui-là, le passer en ligne, ça a été assez facile. L'année passée, c'est un cours qui se donne à l'hiver, donc l'année passée, au moment de la pandémie, il restait seulement l'examen. C'est un examen oral. Les étudiants ont aussi 2 travaux à faire. Là, ils ont 2 plans d'intervention qui ne sont pas faits en classe. D'habitude, on fait le plan d'intervention en classe, mais ils en ont 2 qui ne font pas en classe, qui doivent remettre un en équipe, puis un individuel comme travaux évalués. Et puis, l'examen oral, c'est un nouveau plan d'intervention pour un nouveau cas qui est présenté, qui n'est pas discuté en classe. Les étudiants doivent le présenter, le préparer individuellement, puis le présenter oralement à un tuteur. Donc, c'est 15 à 20 minutes par étudiant. Donc, c'était assez facile de faire ça en ligne. On a donné c'était plus la technique, là, comment on fait pour donner les rendez-vous sans que les étudiants puissent voir l'autre étudiant d'avant là, qui nous stressait au début, mais avec la salle d'attente et tout, ça a été facile finalement. Ça s'est bien fait. Donc, celui-là, ça a été vraiment facile de passer en ligne. Ce que je dirais que j'ai changé dans celui-là, c'est vraiment parce que entre l'année passée puis cette année, c'est de prendre plus de temps pour faire un peu de small chat avec mes étudiants, de ne pas commencer tout de suite dans le sujet du cours, parce que c'est ce que j'étais portée à faire là avec le vidéo, alors que quand on est en présence, on arrive, on prend le temps de jaser un petit peu avec les étudiants avant que les 10 soient arrivés. Là, tout le monde arrive presque en même temps, pile à cause de l'heure. Ils rouvrent leur caméra exactement à 9 heures. Donc, je prends le temps de leur demander qu'est-ce qu'ils ont fait dans le cours du lundi, qu'est-ce qu'ils ont fait la fin de semaine. Puis dans le cours du vendredi, je leur demande s'ils sont fatigués, comment ça va. Puis, juste un petit peu faire de small chat. Comme ça encourage plus la participation. Mais les étudiants sont notés sur leur participation à ces cours-là aussi. Puis, ils ont chacun des rôles. Ils sont 10, puis j'ai seulement 5 rôles, donc ils sont en paire, mais il y en a 2 qui ont le rôle d'animateur. Donc, un animateur, l'autre co-animateur. Puis, celui qui prend plus le lead, le premier cours de la semaine, mais il devient co-animateur le 2e cours, etc. Pour le secrétaire. Le chercheur, c'est celui qui recherche des informations sur Internet si on est pris sur une question qu'on peut trouver tout de suite, qui n'a pas besoin d'une longue recherche. Un observateur qui va s'assurer que tout le monde a le temps de parler, puis un gardien du temps qui va s'assurer qu'on arrive à faire tout ce qu'on a à faire dans les 3 heures, puis qui va aussi nous faire penser de prendre des pauses. L'autre chose que j'ai remarqué dans ce cours-là, c'est que les pauses sont plus systématiques. Là. Les étudiants ont vraiment besoin des pauses 10 minutes à chaque heure. Alors que quand on est en présence, des fois, ils étiraient ça un petit peu. Ils disaient, on va finir ce sujet-là avant, puis ils continuent un petit peu. Mais sinon, je n'ai pas vu beaucoup de changements dans ce cours-là. Mes étudiants participent tous bien. Mais un petit séminaire à 10 personnes, les étudiants participent surtout sur des sujets qui leur sont proches de la clinique, proches de ce qu'ils vont faire comme ergothérapeute. Ils ont toujours bien participé. Je n'ai pas vu beaucoup de changements en ligne. L'autre cours, celui qui est à gauche sur la diapositive, c'est un cours d'analyse critique de la recherche, pratique factuelle en réadaptation, où les étudiants doivent apprendre à critiquer différents articles de recherche pour savoir qu'est-ce qu'ils peuvent prendre dans la recherche pour l'appliquer dans les interventions en réadaptation. C'est un cours où on a depuis 2019, 78 étudiants. Avant, je donnais ce cours-là seulement aux étudiants d'ergothérapie, puis il y avait un cours similaire pour les étudiants de physiothérapie. Et quand c'est devenu un cours commun, moi, je ne voulais pas donner un cours à 78 étudiants, un cours magistral à 78 étudiants. Je ne me voyais pas faire des heures de théorie sur la recherche, qui est un sujet que les étudiants en réadaptation aiment un peu moins. Donc, donner des 3 heures de cours théoriques sur ces sujets-là. Donc, on a remplacé 18 heures de cours par des modules en ligne. Toute la théorie on a décidé de la donner en ligne, puis de garder les temps de présence pour diviser le groupe en petits séminaires. Avant, quand c'était juste étudiants d'ergothérapie, j'essayais de les faire discuter à 40 sur des sujets. Donc, on lisait un article, ils devaient critiquer, puis déjà, je trouvais ça difficile de les faire critiquer à 40 dans la classe, de les faire participer. Donc, quand on est tombé à 78 étudiants ou 80, là, ça dépend des années, mais au maximum, c'est 80. Je me disais que les discussions allaient être difficiles à 80, c'était déjà difficile à 40. Donc, en remplaçant 18 heures de cours en présence par 18 heures théoriques en ligne, des modules en ligne autoportants que les étudiants peuvent faire par eux-mêmes, mais ça nous permettait d'engager des assistants d'enseignement pour animer les séminaires ou d'avoir d'autres professeurs qui allaient animer les séminaires avec moi, puisqu'il y avait moins d'heures de contact à avoir pour la partie théorique, là. Donc, c'est le choix qu'on avait fait avant la pandémie. Quand la pandémie est arrivée, bien là, c'est sûr que le fait qu'on avait déjà du contenu en ligne, c'était un plus parce qu'on avait déjà ça, mais en même temps, c'est la première année qu'on l'avait mis en ligne. Le contenu n'était pas parfait. Donc, pour moi, je trouvais que j'ai manqué de temps pour le recorriger parce que vu que j'avais déjà du contenu en ligne, quand la pandémie est arrivée, dans mon programme, nos étudiants, il y avait un stage à faire normalement au moment de la pandémie, puis les stages étaient tous annulés. Donc, le cours a été devancé. Donc, au lieu d'être au mois de fin mai, il a commencé au début avril. Donc, je n'ai pas eu le temps de tout corriger le contenu en ligne. Je trouvais qu'il y avait trop de textes en contenu en ligne, qu'il faudrait qu'il devienne un petit peu plus avec des activités, mais ça n'a pas pu être fait. Par contre, de la part des étudiants, j'ai eu moins de commentaires négatifs. C'est comme la première année, les étudiants auraient voulu des cours en présence comme d'habitude. Hein, ils ne comprenaient pas pourquoi on avait fait des modules en ligne. Puis, ils aimaient beaucoup les séminaires, mais ils n'aimaient pas les modules en ligne. Tandis que la deuxième année, ben, ça, on ne l'a pas eu comme critique. Tout le monde comprenait qu'on ne pouvait pas être en présence. Donc, les modules en ligne, je n'ai pas eu de commentaires. J'ai eu des commentaires encore qui avaient trop de texte, mais ce n'était pas comparé à un cours en présence. Donc, c'est un peu mieux accepté. La partie séminaire, c'était peut-être un petit peu plus difficile à les faire partir sur la partie séminaire parce que la critique d'articles, ils ont plus de difficultés. La critique de la recherche, ils ont plus de difficultés à se sentir à l'aise de la critiquer. Ils sont moins sûrs de leur réponse. Quand tu leur fais analyser des cas cliniques en ergothérapie, ils ont peut-être eu plus d'autres formations, d'autres cours, puis ils sont plus sûrs d'eux-mêmes, ils participent plus rapidement. Celui-là, et même en présence, ils participent un petit peu moins, mais en ligne, c'était encore plus difficile de les faire participer. Il y avait un petit peu plus peur d'exprimer leur opinion. Donc, c'était vraiment plus au fur et à mesure des séances qu'on a appris à commencer le cours en révisant un peu les modules en ligne, les modules théoriques, plutôt que tout de suite commencer à critiquer l'article. Et puis, au moment où on faisait cette révision-là, au début, j'essayais de les faire participer, puis ça ne participait pas beaucoup, mais là, en faisant des sondages, des poules pour savoir c'était quoi leur réponse, là, ça leur permettait de participer sans trop se mouiller, là, sans trop que les autres sachent qui savait la réponse puis qui ne la savait pas. Puis en faisant cette révision-là, là, quand on avait pour critiquer l'article, c'était plus facile parce qu'il y avait plus confiance en leur capacité. Puis bon, j'avais suggéré à tout le monde d'ouvrir leur caméra, mais j'en avais plus qui ne l'ouvraient pas. Mais c'était au mois d'avril, comme on dit, c'était vraiment au tout début de la pandémie. Peut-être que les étudiants n'étaient pas tous bien équipés à ce moment-là non plus. Moi non plus, je n'étais pas bien équipée comme maintenant. Moi aussi, j'avais des problèmes d'Internet dans le sens qu'il fallait absolument que je me mette dans la pièce la plus passante de la maison pour avoir un bon accès à Internet au mois d'avril. Tandis que maintenant, je suis capable d'avoir un bon accès à Internet dans mon bureau fermé. Même s'il est plus loin du Wi-Fi, j'ai des nouvelles connexions qui font que ça va bien. Fait que je me dis, les étudiants aussi avaient peut-être ce genre de problème-là. J'ai bien hâte de voir comment ça va aller au mois de mai prochain. J'espère que les étudiants vont tous ouvrir leur caméra comme ils le font dans mon cours d'ergothérapie et puis que ça facilite vraiment la participation quand je peux voir les étudiants. Puis qu'on est plus engagé. Puis les petits sondages, c'est certainement quelque chose que je vais continuer à faire. J'essaie de trouver peut-être d'autres façons plus créatives là, de les faire participer encore que ce que j'ai fait au mois d'avril dernier.
Merci, Jacinthe. So we already have two panelists that share some of their experience. So I think we should probably open up the floor. I saw there was a bit of activity, a few comments, and Samantha and answer some of them in the chat. So anyone has a question, a comment, you can just open up your microphone. I think Jovan has unlocked the microphone of all participants. So please feel free to jump in or raise your hand if you want to be called upon.
I have a question for Samantha, if I may. Samantha, you gave us the perspective at the same time as a student, because you still are a student, but also an instructor, because you are also teaching. So that's interesting. You have those both aspects. And you, as an instructor, demonstrated actually how you bring more engagement by using those, little polling apps and so on. Your perspective as a student, can you bring more or tell us more about your own perspective as a student?
Of course, thank you for your question. As a student, I've excelled. When I study online, I'm able to learn at my own pace, and this is something that's helped me a lot. I think it's a great way for myself to learn because I have that self-discipline to keep moving forward. But it does definitely get hard at sometimes. I do struggle with mental illness, and I'm going to be very open with that. And a lot of students struggle with the same thing. And I know that it's a hard topic to discuss with professors, especially, and teachers online. When that's done, the communication is done through a Zoom platform or done through email. It loses that personal connection to the people you're interacting with. So there are difficulties for sure, and I've seen a lot of positive aspects of the online learning, but I definitely have faced challenges, and I know I speak for my fellow peers as well when I say the same.
Thank you very much, Samantha.
Thank you.
Another comment for someone or a question for the first two panelists that share their experience? If not, that's okay. We can move on to the other two panelists, and we'll get more time at the end for more questions if it comes at that point. So I think I'm gonna move on with Tim. So Tim, if you wanna open up your webcam and your microphone. So like I said earlier, Tim is a student in political science. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nancy. And I'm going to try to share my screen. I think Samantha put me to shame a little bit, and so I made a hasty PowerPoint, and I feel like that might be helpful. So I'll try to do that. Great. Okay. So now I am trying to locate where the PowerPoint went. So forgive me. There you go. So thank you very much for the introduction. I'm very pleased to be here. Can I get confirmation that we can see the PowerPoint? Awesome, thank you. My name is Tim Gulliver. I'm a third year political science student at the University of Ottawa. I'll be speaking in English, but je peux parler en français aussi, une question français aussi, bien sûr. And I currently work at the University of Ottawa Students' Union as the Advocacy Commissioner. So a lot of my mandate, my role this year has been trying to improve the online learning experience for students, understanding their frustrations, their reservations, their concerns, and working with the university to do that. And I think when I received the invitation to speak about some of the changes with online learning, the constructive shifts, I have to admit, no one comes to the student union saying, here's the great things the university is doing. They come here with criticism. And so it was a bit of a challenging exercise to think, okay, let's flip the role and see what have we done well as a community and where can we still improve. And so I'm trying to take perhaps this presentation in that direction. Although I think Samantha hit out of the park, so I think keep your expectations low, but that's kind of where I'd like to go with this today. So I'll also preface my remarks with a couple of points briefly. First of all, I think it's not easy to determine what has changed necessarily because so much is still already in flux. We're still learning as a community. A lot is happening right now, and so it's still difficult to parse between what's improved and where we can still go further. I think it's also difficult to untangle and separate a COVID-19 problem from an online learning problem, or COVID-19 impact on our livelihoods, and perhaps how that is masking the strength of online learning. I think it becomes difficult to untangle that. I think one of the reasons why I wake up every morning and go, oh, Zoom University, online learning, is it's not because of necessarily, and it can in some cases, but not specifically because of the way that we're doing online learning, although again, there are definitely improvements to be made, but a lot of it can also just be the fact that I'm waking up, going to school, doing work in the same room. And so that's definitely a COVID-19 issue for sure. And I think the last thing I'll mention is my experience is certainly not that of the entire student body. I'm still in fairly large lectures, and the political science students is more lecture-based, not much lab work, for example. So I don't pretend to speak for the entire student body. That said, I'll try to present my remarks in three overarching categories. I think the first one I'd want to talk about are platforms. So the platforms that we're using to conduct online learning, to meet professors and students, instructors and students to discuss, to participate in courses. And I think what we've seen throughout, since the beginning of COVID-19 and to today, is more a trend towards more homogeneity across platforms. I think we started off in the pandemic using several platforms, and I think now we've this is obviously generally speaking, we seem to be sticking to a few, and it's created a more reliable experience. So speaking very anecdotally, in March, I had classes in 4 different platforms when we switched online very, very hastily, and because we had to because of the pandemic. I had a course on YouTube, of course, that was only PowerPoint, a course on Zoom, but the professor couldn't figure out how to unmute, so that was always very challenging. And one professor just uploaded the lecture notes on Brightspace, and that was it. And so it was very scattered, I think, and we're all trying to do our best. I think I took two courses in June, and then we had one course that was more on Adobe Connect and Zoom, and another course that was more uploaded lectures to Brightspace. But there were still challenges there in terms of getting the lectures uploaded on time because of how big the files were. And so I could see that the professors were trying to understand the challenges, how to best deliver the course content, given the challenges and the nature of online learning. And then in September and January, so the fall semester and this semester, I've only had courses on Zoom. So I don't know that that's a universal experience. What I do suspect is there has been a trend towards more homogeneity across platforms. Where we've kind of figured out what works best, what platforms have the virtual infrastructure embedded within them to deliver the course content most effectively. I think that's been a really positive change. I think that's going to be a change which we can rely on and lean on in the future if we want to continue developing online learning options. I think it also creates more predictability, having these 2 or 3 go-to platforms, because then you're spending less time trying to figure out how to unmute, figuring out how to log on, and more time just engaging fully in the course. And so bring that predictability back, especially at a time when things are so unpredictable, which is obviously a COVID-19 thing, but that's super, super helpful. I would also say that I think one thing which I've noticed that students are using more and more often, and professors are encouraging students to use more and more often, are things like the raise hand function, if you want to speak in class. And I think previously we just had, especially in March, for that Zoom class, I just kind of unmute and say professor, and we didn't really know how to kind of engage in the norms and the machinations of online learning. And now I think we've found more structure, and that's a good thing. I think the raise hand function works quite well when the professor is looking out for it and encouraging it. And the polls, through Zoom especially, I found that polls are quite effective and a way to engage students, hook students right away to create a more engaging learning experience. And I would also say that I've seen more and more students using the chat function. And obviously there's some challenges with that when it comes to distractions or perhaps even in some cases bullying, which is obviously inappropriate. But if you cast that aside for a second, I found that it brings back some of the more informal communication that you would have in a regular classroom. The kind of, you walk into a classroom and you miss the last class and the professor talking about something, you can just tap someone on the shoulder and say, hey, what did I miss last time? Or can I have those notes? Or when's the midterm? These little things, the little informal communication methods that you have in a lecture hall. I think the chat function brings that back. I think one thing I've also noticed, which is really awesome, is how the chat function is being used to collaborate between students. I was in a Spanish class over the summertime, and sometimes a student might ask me, why is there an S there? Why is there an Enya there? Why is it conjugated this way? Maybe their audio cut out and the professor is not gonna have the time to run through every single question. So you have students kind of helping each other out within the chat, which I think is really fantastic as well. And you've seen these virtual communities, Facebook groups, Messenger groups, WhatsApp groups being created by students in order to kind of navigate the learning experience and bring back the informal communication. So I think we've seen just a general shift towards that. I've spoken a lot about platforms, so I'll try to move on. But one thing I'd also mention is I think we're seeing a better incorporation of multimedia. So videos, you can share screen through video, documentary, clips like that. That really also improves the online learning experience. And so I'll speak about innovation next, and I'm mindful of time. But I think that incorporation of multimedia content is a great way to make the online learning experience more engaging. It breaks up the 3 hours of listening to professor lecture on Zoom phenomenon when it's a quite different experience, as we've all recognized, from going into a classroom and listening to somebody. It's very different, kind of being stuck in your seat listening to a lecture. And so I think incorporating multimedia content, using the share screen function, using the polls, and the other features that Zoom and Teams and other platforms provide are really, really important. I was also in a course last semester where the professor used podcasts, or which I would consider an alternative method of delivering course content, where they have guest speakers from Victoria or from even abroad speak on a certain topic in a podcast format. And the class would essentially consist of a giant discussion group on the podcast, which students were expected to listen to. I recognize that not every professor has the time to record a podcast, but I think I highlight this example as a great way to use and harness the potential of online learning to bring in these guest lecturers who you wouldn't be able to bring in physically all the time because of course, the travel and whatnot. And so I think that's a great way to kind of create a more engaging experience. And it brings the course content, the platforms that students are already using, like Spotify, for example, where they can download it and go on a walk and listen to the lecture, which is, I did that personally, it was fantastic. And I think new evaluative models as well, reduction high stakes exams, the stress of sitting in front of a proctored exam, and more essay-based take-home assignments. It incorporates flexibility while providing professors with a sample to evaluate the student with as well, a really important sample, of course. And so I think we've seen more innovation. That's always a good thing. And lastly, I'll touch briefly on this. At the Student Union, obviously, we've been pushing for more flexibility, more compassion with online learning in the context of COVID-19. I know that Dr. Jamie Rutherford can attest to that. But I think one thing that we've also done, is very important to keep in mind is, in addition to maintain that flexibility, maintaining best practices after COVID-19 is over in a post-COVID-19 online learning experience, which I suspect will happen in some form. I think that one thing which we'll begin to appreciate a lot more is the flexibility that online learning provides in terms of not having to commute and not having to go to class and being able to follow one or two courses online or from home or whatnot. I think we'll begin to appreciate that more and more. I think right now we're just not appreciating it mostly because we're stuck. And I miss the commute. I miss going to the office. I miss going to class. But I think incorporating that more into our learning experience moving forwards will help resolve a lot of issues and will balance the best of many worlds. And so I think that there still is a lot of potential in online learning, although many of those may be masked right now by the pandemic we're living in. And when done well, I think it can provide students with flexibility, all while maintaining the regular rigors of an online of a regular classroom. So that's kind of my thoughts on this. I'm happy to get questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim. That was great. Let's move on with our finalist panelists. So Hélène, if you want to open up your microphone and your camera. So Hélène Beaulieu, professor in biology, that's your turn.
Merci, Nancy. So my talk is going to be bilingual, and I'll mix French and English together because Franglish is the best. So I'm going to be more of a general kind of approach, I think. I'm not going to go into the nitty gritty of what I've done as a professor in my classes, unless you want me to, and I'll be happy to do that as well. But I kind of have like a maybe more of an overview of what I've experienced, and I think what my colleagues have experienced as well since the start of this pandemic, right? So so at the very beginning, it was a scramble. So solutions were just solutions, the worst that we could come up with. And I think that even then, even though we had 2 days to turn ourselves around, we did pretty much a great job, I think, of trying to mitigate some of the issues we had, and especially for us in biology, with the labs, chemistry, science labs, very difficult. But we did our best. We were towards the end of the semester, but then those had to be rethought as we came into September. So we had a whole summer, right? And during that summer, what I've seen, because one of my colleague, Colin Maupetit, so so I'm like what we used to call, what's it called? Like my position is teaching only, basically. I don't actually do wet lab research. So my research is on education in sciences. And there's a few of us in that position in the Faculty of Sciences. And one of those person is Colin Maupetit, who's more experienced at teaching than me. And he tried to get together like a group, a community of practice that we could discuss, what we're going to do, what would be the best thing to do for our students. And we have large groups as well. So I'm going to go through the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's not very original, but I think it works well, right? So the good. So the good was this community that kind of was born out of this. What are we going to do, and how are we going to do this, and what's the best way of doing it, right? So I think that in the faculty, we kind of decided to have group meetings that would be organized on certain themes, like how to engage our students, how are we going to do that, how to do evaluations, how are we going to do that. So developing these communities was really good and enriching. People that I didn't know would be actually interested in talking about the nitty-gritty of, pedagogical approaches were there, and they were assiduous to these sessions, which is absolutely fantastic. And I think that that's one of the things that, holds me to, so I want this to continue. So that was really great. The other good thing is, as Tom was mentioning, like flexibility is fantastic, right? So the flexibility that we give our students in time, even if we could give them flexibility in choice of modules of, so you have a course on such and such, there's 10 modules, you choose the 6 ones that you want to do, and then, that would be all fantastic, right? But all of these rethinking takes time, and that brings me towards the ugly bits. But flexibility is great. Too much flexibility is like sometimes students tie the rope around their necks, and flexibility doesn't mean anything goes either, right? So I think that we have to be, so the flexibility means that I understand things can take more time to do. I understand that, doing an exam 2 hours on Brightspace, things can go wrong technically, right? You can drop the internet or whatever. But if I give you 2 weeks to do something, that due date is the due date. And I'm not going to be flexible on the due date. So sometimes I think managing expectations is truly important, right? It's important face to face. But I think that this communication of these expectations and, knowing that, so having this talk with students about, I'm expecting this from myself, I'm expecting this from you. These are the reasons why we are expecting these things, right? And then managing these expectations is really pivotal in order for this communication and the trust to be able to establish between, I have your best interest at heart, but please do know that I'm a human being as well. So I think that this was achieved quite well. So that's part of the good as well. So I think that I've never heard so many students say, oh, thank you, Dr. Bourdieu, and thank you this and thank you that. Because, you know, they are really good towards me. And I try to be really good towards them and explain that to them, you know, the logic of things. So I think that this communication with students has actually increased a lot. And obviously, the bad of that, the email tsunami, because there's just so many unbelievable, it's like unmanageable virtually. I have a colleague who's done a 24-hour take-home exam. During that 24-hour, she received over 400 emails about this exam. She couldn't do anything else. There was nothing else that she could do. She would just have to manage these exams. And then after the exam was done, then there's the panel of students who actually, oh, I didn't have time to post it in, there was something this, and then, you know, so all of these is really time consuming. So the good thing is we thought about our pedagogy, we developed a community, we've developed more flexible ways of teaching, we've included that in our syllabus. We've been thinking about impactful teaching, which is a great thing to do, but we haven't had time to really try it out properly. Teaching online is like creating a new course, and every single one of us who's teaching, every single course we've had to teach this year is like creating a new course. And then you have to mitigate whatever fails during the semester as well. So the actual workload on instructors has been absolutely unmanageable, including those who had to do homeschooling with their children as well. So thinking that how we move from here, like how we progress from this, what do we take home is, you know, we're resilient, that's true, but good Lord, you know, I think if we wanted to bank on our new skills, at new tools, new tech tools, all of this, we're going to have to give time to instructors to really be able to dig into this innovative way of teaching, because a lot of the community that I was talking about has discovered that they actually like teaching online. And some of our students also like learning online. So how are we going to proceed from here is like all this transition from face-to-face into an online class. What we've managed to do is to do just that. So everyone, so if you've been here all day, you've heard everybody that you can't just transfer what you did face-to-face online. But we didn't have time to actually think innovatively and do creative things. And, you know, there's a lot of, a lot of the community I was talking about is like, how can I do this like with minimal amount of work? Because I have a research program and my PhDs are working in the lab, and I've got to apply for these grants, and I've got to do this, and I've got kids to homeschool and all of this. There just wasn't enough time to really bank on these new ideas and new skills. So I'm hoping that in the next couple of years, when we do this post-mortem, then we really, look at the good and give time to the people who really want to develop this a little bit more and to increase the choice of our students in pedagogy in order to be able to truly develop these new skills and these new pedagogies in order to help everybody, help the instructors, help our students, and develop these communities that are actually being able to communicate experience across the board so that we can develop even quicker, right? So that's my take home anyway. I mean, there's a lot to be said, to be honest, but that's my take home.
Thank you so much, Hélène. That was great. So again, I see that some action is happening in the discussion space in the chat, like some people are posting and other people are answering. So we are reopening up the floor for anyone that want to ask a question to any member of the panel. So Jovan, if you can spotlight everyone from the panel so that we can see everyone that could address some of those questions, or even if you just have a comment, or if you want to share a different experience or a similar experience. So that's the time to do it. So I'm seeing that Javan slowly is going to put everyone in a spotlight where it's coming, Javan, you're on your way. And I'm waiting for the first person that want to, okay, I got someone, Diane Sainte-Marie, if you want to go ahead. I think your microphone is open. Yeah.
Yes, I'm unmuted, I believe.
Yes, I think you're good. We can hear you.
Okay, well, thank you all for your reflections here. It's good. And Elaine or Hélène, I was going to follow up a little bit with you. Even what we're doing right now is a community of practice, right? So while it might be a lousy situation that COVID has brought this about, I think it has created this increased communication amongst people who are interested in, you know, enriching the student experience as much as possible. And so I think this idea of a community of practice is great. And I know one started, because I joined one, I think that TLSS started on Slack. But be honest, I didn't keep up with it. But in the meanwhile, I've started another one, but it's really specific to the courses that I teach. Because sometimes it's about, oh my God, I would be doing, you know, usually I would teach this concept this way, but I needed students in the class to be working with each other and I can't do it. Do you have ideas for how I might, you know, do this now online? And so this idea of community of practice, I think is really important, and it kind of ties in a bit with what Tim was saying in terms of, you know, teachers taking the time to try to figure out how they can be communicating some of these ideas and what kind of platforms can they bring together to do that. So that has been, for me, a very enriching kind of experience that wouldn't have occurred but for the fact that COVID has happened. So I'm reaching out to people that I usually only think of in a research form. And now we're creating this space to talk about how they teach the concepts that we're usually researching and so on. So I just wanted to, it's not really a question per se, but just an agreement that idea that this situation has really brought forward some of the good as well.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, there's different types of communities as well. So you can have a community around a subject. So we had a science, like teach science sessions, where it would be like the whole of the faculty of science, and we had teach biology sessions where it would be more of a, you know, our colleagues in biology. But there's a group as well called the Egg, who was started by two really keen law professors who wanted to do gainful teaching, right? So there's a community that's of different topics from different faculties who are interested in gainful learning. And so that's also the different types of community that you can gather. And Slack, the Slack one from Madison is, and Jeremy Kerr is a good one. And you can post these sessions for these different communities so that, you know, even if I say I schedule a teach science session, but it's on evaluations, like creating authentic evaluations, that also applies to all sorts, right? So if we could, you know, use these platforms in order to communicate with each other, different interests, then I think we're all gaining here. And hopefully students would be roped in these communities as well. And then they would have a word to say, oh, please don't do that, that's awful, right? Or, oh, we would like to see this, you know, is this possible in your class? Because it's the discussion with the student is about, okay, so I used to do this in my class. This is what I would like to do. And this is what I can do. Right? And those kind of subjects is difficult. And if students are brought as partners inside these decisions, I think everybody's going to be a winner. Like the students say, oh, we want you to do this. Like, I want personal feedback on my exam. There's 1,200 of you. No, not do it. I wish I could. Feedback is great, but no, not doing that, right? So these discussions are really good. So hopefully this community will even widen more.
Could I do a quick response to what just something Elaine had finished on about personal feedback? Again, there's strategies that can be used in these online platforms that weren't accessible before. And again, same with kind of reducing the email burden. I found that providing overall comments in general, if you didn't get first full marks, these are the kinds of things that you might not have had. You didn't fully include the equation, or you dropped this sign, or you neglected to also present the opposing view, which was needed, and yada, yada. And that was a way to capture everybody in the class. And then it would be, if this doesn't fit with you, or if you think you've done all of this, then you can get in touch with me. But first kind of go through what the standard ways that people didn't get full marks. And it was a way to kind of quickly capture the class, which was more difficult before, but you know everybody, because not everybody shows up to class, you know, and often it was done verbally, but you know everybody has access to reading that. And so that's kind of a change that I'm going to be carrying forward, even when we do return to face-to-face, that you have these forums that I wouldn't have thought of in Brightspace that allows where you know every student has access to get that information when they need it.
Thank you so much. Rashmi, your hand was raised. So.
Hello everyone. Bonjour à tout le monde. J'aimerais juste dire premièrement que c'était fantastique cette session. It was amazing just to hear everybody and to hear all your wonderful opinions. Really nice. I mean, I know as somebody who teaches, it's wonderful to hear the other side of the story. Just avoir l'opportunité de voir vos opinions, d'entendre c'est quoi vos problèmes, c'est une grosse, ça nous aide beaucoup à améliorer notre enseignement. It really helps us to help target the things that we want to do and the ways that we can help you. And this is really, I mean, I know my questions have been a little bit frustrated at times, but it's really because I'm trying so hard to help students, and I'm willing to do literally anything to make this a better experience, but I'm finding that it's all one way. Like I ask students, what can I do to help you? And then they're all like, you know, oh no, it's really great what you're doing. We really appreciate that. And then you get the evaluations and like, oh, well, you know, it would have been better if there was more of this, or it would have been better. And I'm just like, I don't know how many times they asked you, why didn't you just tell me? You know, it's just, that's so frustrating at times, because you know, especially when, you know, every class, every 2 classes, I would be like, you know, okay, guys, I'm doing this. I think this should help you. And I always explain to students why I do what I do. So I say, you know, I offer them choices. I'll be like, you know, would you prefer 2 midterms, or would you like chapter tests that are shorter, but keep you on track? Because my students don't have the background everybody else has. They have done like a 12U course. So I have additional classes. I'm just like, you know, I mean, I can do 2 midterms. That's easier for me, but I don't think it's better for you, because it forces you, not forces, but gives you the opportunity to push things off, right? Which, hey, I'm a procrastinator. I know how that works. Le choix, je ne vais rien faire jusqu'au temps qu'il faut que je fasse comme ça. It's just really the matter of, I figure if, you know, I give students that choice. If you would like to have a lot of tests, but they're low stakes, I can do that. 2 midterms, I can do that. And they inevitably, they voted for multiple tests. And I was like, no problem, you know. Some of them were short, half an hour, some of them were a little bit longer, depending on the content. But then, you know, then you have students who will say at the end, if they voted for it, and then they'll tell me at the end, there was just too much work. And I'm just, I mean, I don't know what else, like how else I'm going to try polling. So every time there was I asked students, it was an anonymous poll, because I didn't want anybody to feel that they were being pressured to do one thing or the other. It was an anonymous poll, and I said, you can say whatever you want, and I will not know who you were. And then if the poll is like 60-40, we have to discuss it, and then we'll re-poll again. And so then this is the kind of way I tried to approach it. And so it's just, I don't know what else I can do. And I'm just like, give me ideas, please, so I can do whatever it's possible to know, to help students out. Because my heart breaks when I hear some of the individual circumstances that students are going through, and it just, I don't know, as the instructor, do I have the power to take that into consideration or not? I don't know, I mean, if it's one person out of 1,000, I always try to find a way to work around it. But sometimes, if it's like 30 people out of 100, you're going, well, the other 70 don't want things to change. At some point in time, I have to say, I cannot do something for you and something for you. I have to do things sort of one way. I just don't know. I'm just looking for answers, anything that can help to make it a better experience for students.
Can I respond to that?
Sure, Samantha.
I completely understand your frustration. And in fact, I, as a student, and then also I have that, perspective as an instructor as well, I understand, and I'm sure a lot of educators aren't able to understand that frustration. And I think that only emphasizes the need and the urgency to give educators and not just students, but educators and teachers, professors, resources, real life resources, and real help, because we're giving a lot to students and supporting them and holding their hands. But you said, teachers, educators, professors, they're human beings as well, and they deal with a lot. And then the swamp of emails and overwhelming questions, and it's overwhelming, it's unbearable, and I understand that frustration very, very much. And personally, I don't see a solution. It's not going to happen overnight. I've presented some of my personal experiences highlighting the positives, but please understand that I've gone through the negatives as well, and I still go through the negatives. I still deal with students who don't want to participate, who don't want to accept my help. And that's very real. So don't feel alone in that. Know that there is a lot of emphasis on help for students, and there isn't enough for educators. There isn't enough for teachers who are going through very real struggles, just like you are. So I think if we move towards opening more discussions like this and presenting more of the difficulties that teachers are facing, we'll be able to foster communities and create resources that will be available for people who are dealing with these real struggles.
Thank you so much, Samantha. I think we have time for last question. So Guy Drouin, if you want to ask your question, and you'll have kind of the wrap-up question.
OK. Question pour Hélène. Moi, je me suis senti un peu abandonné par l'université parce que j'aurais aimé, au mois de janvier, avoir un genre de post-mortem. Tu parlais des post-mortem tantôt. Qu'est-ce qui a marché? Qu'est-ce qui n'a pas marché? J'ai entendu une rumeur qui disait qu'il y avait eu de la tricherie en mathématiques dans les examens. Comment est-ce qu'ils peuvent dealer avec ça? Comment est-ce que... C'est ça, j'aimerais ça. C'est Tim qui m'a appris que, pendant sa présentation, que Zoom était la plateforme qui était utilisée par tous ces professeurs. L'université pourrait nous fournir cette information-là. Ils nous abandonnent, on est chacun chez nous, dans notre bureau, puis on fait ce qu'on peut avec ce qu'on a, mais on nous renseigne pas sur les meilleures pratiques pour des examens en sciences politiques ou des examens en mathématiques. Moi, j'enseigne la génétique. Puis la génétique, ça revient de la mathématique. Fait que j'aimerais savoir, c'est quoi la meilleure façon d'avoir des examens, d'enseigner d'ailleurs.
Moi aussi. Moi aussi, je veux savoir.
Oui, c'est ça, mais il est où le post-mortem? Ça nous en prend un, là? Où on peut
je pense qu'il évolue le post-mortem. Tu vois, comme Jovan, avec le TLSS, ils ont fait des sondages pour comprendre du côté des professeurs, du côté des étudiants, qu'est-ce qui avait le plus été utilisé, qu'est-ce qui avait le plus été aimé, qu'est-ce qu'on n'aimait pas. Ce sondage-là a été fait en grande partie, qui était très instructif. Les associations d'étudiants aussi ont fait des sondages. Puis ces sondages-là ont été, en fait, le sondage CLSS a été posté, je pense, la semaine passée. Non, c'est ça, Aline? Oui. Et puis, c'est sûr que c'est un courriel parmi la 60 millions de courriels qu'on reçoit. À moins là, d'avoir été bien averti, c'est ça exactement, c'est le résumé de ce qu'on a trouvé. Peut-être qu'on peut faire un Teach Science sur le post-mortem, justement, là, pour au moins notre groupe, nous, à Faculté des sciences. Mais c'est en train de se faire, puis c'est quelque chose qui évolue. Fait que moi, présentement, il y a une étude qui va commencer aussi sur, justement, l'intégrité académique. J'invite tout le monde qui veut comprendre un peu plus comment est-ce que ça se passe. Est-ce qu'il y a vraiment plus de tricherie qu'il y en a normalement dans nos examens? C'est pas clair. Et puis, est-ce que c'est partout? Est-ce qu'il y a des sujets particuliers qui sont plus affectés? Donc, ça aussi, c'est quelque chose qu'il faudrait comprendre et savoir. Juste au moins, tu sais, même si on ne continue pas dans cette voie-là d'enseignement en ligne, au moins pour se rassurer ou se dérassurer de nos étudiants, est-ce que la valeur de leur note vaut ce qu'elle vaut finalement? Donc, c'est comme quelque chose d'important aussi à savoir.
Mais je n'avais pas d'informations. Au printemps, il y a eu de la tricherie, mais mes moyennes étaient 20 de plus que d'habitude. Fait que toi, 65 était 85. Fait que là, cet hiver, j'essayais de me protéger contre ça puis de trouver des façons de faire. Puis là, dans mon cours de génétique, avec les 240 étudiants, il y en a une quarantaine de corrigés. Puis la moyenne semble être environ 10 ou 15 plus bas que d'habitude. Fait que là, c'est dur d'ajuster quand tu penses qu'il va y avoir beaucoup de tricherie. Puis là, tu t'aperçois que le monde a plus de difficultés, sont moins engagés, sont moins...
Aline, je vais te redonner un dernier morceau de parole pour finir.
Oui.
Mais avant, peut-être, je veux juste remercier s'il y en a qui veulent commencer à se diriger vers la prochaine session. Je remercie surtout mes panélistes, puis après ça, je vais laisser Aline donner le dernier mot. Fait que merci à Hélène, Samantha, Tim. Je pense que Jacinthe a eu un problème de connexion, on l'a perdu il y a quelques minutes, mais je vous remercie grandement, c'était passionnant. Aline, je te laisse conclure.
Oui, merci Guy d'avoir posé cette question parce que j'ai bien noté. Il y a effectivement, par exemple, ce symposium-là qu'on a organisé, ou ces 3 symposiums, ce sont justement les occasions pour faire des post-mortem et pour voir l'évolution. Donc ça, c'est une façon de faire. Effectivement, mon bureau et le SAEA ont organisé donc ces sondages que l'on fait périodiquement et on publie les résultats de ces sondages. Et donc, c'est distribué au niveau de tous les enseignants pour leur donner justement un petit peu cette température, où est-ce qu'en est l'université au niveau des étudiants, des professeurs, des TA. Donc ça, c'est une autre façon de faire. Au niveau de la tricherie, oui, effectivement, on a les rapports que l'on a des différentes facultés montrent qu'il y a beaucoup plus de cas de tricherie. Donc, j'ai un comité sur l'intégrité académique qui travaille là-dessus, mais ce que j'ai bien noté, et puis je travaille avec tous les vice-doyens qui reçoivent toutes les informations justement, mais ce dont je m'aperçois, c'est que évidemment la communication et comment décliner en fin de compte toute cette communication n'atteint pas tout le monde. Donc, c'est demain d'ailleurs, j'ai ma rencontre avec tous les vice-doyens. Je vais reprendre ta remarque, Guy, pour qu'on puisse trouver ensemble le moyen de faire, d'amener l'information qu'on a en fin de compte, mais de l'amener beaucoup plus vers tout le monde, vers les enseignants, vers les étudiants, etc. Donc ça, c'est bien noté, mais je voulais quand même te dire qu'il y a beaucoup de choses qui se font pour justement prendre le pouls, mieux comprendre, mais notre gros problème, c'est la communication. Donc, c'est noté et on va agir là-dessus. Et je voudrais aussi... oui, tu voulais ajouter quelque chose?
Non, juste merci, c'est beau. C'est beau.
Ça va?
Non, au niveau de la communication, aujourd'hui, j'ai appris au propos du GPS académique. Mais c'est superbe, cette affaire-là. Mais oui, ça n'a pas été annoncé dans la Gazette nulle part. Je l'ai appris aujourd'hui.
Ça a été annoncé dans des messages qu'on a envoyés au début de l'année en septembre, des messages que le SAEA d'ailleurs a envoyés à tous les professeurs. J'avais demandé à ce qu'on ait aussi une communication dans la Gazette, mais il y avait tellement de choses qui se passaient dans la Gazette que c'est pas passé. Mais pendant ce symposium, Olivia m'a recontacté et m'a dit, Aline, là, il y a beaucoup de gens qui sont pas encore au courant. Donc maintenant, je recontacte Patrick Charette pour être sûr que ça passe aussi dans la Gazette. Mais c'est un message qu'on avait au début de l'année, communiqué à tout le monde. Mais évidemment, vous recevez tellement de courriels, etc. C'est très, très dur de faire la sélection de l'information. Donc là aussi, il faut qu'on réfléchisse pour avoir de meilleurs moyens de communication. Donc, c'est bien, tu vois, j'ai mon grand cahier avec toutes mes notes. J'ai bien noté tout ça. En tout cas, merci beaucoup pour tout le monde pour cette session. Et puis, donc, je vous invite à aller à notre dernière session où on fait un petit wrap-up. Voilà, merci.
Merci tout le monde. Merci.